Heyo, everybody. Zack here with RevZilla, and welcome to another edition of Daily Rider, where we learn about motorcycles as we ride. Our transport to the office today is Indian's FTR S. So that is a big, burly, liquid-cooled American V-twin in a stripped-down chassis, sprinkled with some state-of-the-art technology, all for about $15,000. It seems like could be a pretty good combination of corn-fed flat tracker and European sporting prowess, but as usual, there's only one way I know how to find out. Let's do it. Okie dokie, everybody. Here we go. Indian FTR S. As usual, take a look at some stuff that you can't necessarily see while we're riding. Big steel tube frame, steel tube swing arm as well, kind of cool. Side mounted shock, 1203 cc V twin. The big thing with the 2022 FTR here is 17-inch wheels. That replaces a 19-inch front and 18-inch rear on the previous model. Big old Brembo calipers, 320 mil discs, steel braided lines, radial pull lever, nice high quality stuff. LED headlight here. Kind of cool alien eye headlight situation, which I like the look of. The FTR still has that sort of flat track replica look, right? It's got this sort of low tank, like flat top look, even though it's got a little butt stop on the seat, but it's kind of, rakish stinger kind of tail section and a real low top to the tank, which gives it that American flat track look to it. But when you look around, you got Zack's suspension, front and rear, you got Brembo brakes, you got Accommodations exhaust, European componentry on this American bike. So they're definitely, it's reaching for a slightly different audience, you might say. We'll talk about that more as we hit the road, as well as how the 17-inch wheels affect the handling, blah, blah, blah. What else can we look at while we're sitting here, though? Oh, yeah. They got these scoops on the side of the radiator, which I think are kind of interesting. I'm not sure how well you can see them, but there's scoops here that direct air around the side of the radiator and toward what seems like the engine, but I think more likely the rider. Last thing we can do here is fire up the dash here, which will say FTR 1200 on the dash, just like it does on the tank, even though the official word from Indian is that there is no longer 1200 in the name. Technically, it's just FTR. It's a 4.3-inch dash, and yeah, we can fire it up with a single push of the button, which I think is kind of cool. There you go. 1200 cc's of American muscle. All right, I'm getting kind of sweaty standing around in the sun here, so let's hit the road. Alrighty, out onto the city streets. First things first, as usual, we can talk about some specs. So like I said, 1200cc engine. Claimed horsepower is 120, I believe. Claimed torque is 87. We'll talk a little bit more about how that fits into the global landscape of motorcycling a little bit later, but not bad numbers. I mean, just about, yeah, torque in the 80s, horsepower in the 120s. That's pretty spicy, I'd say. 3.4 gallon gas tank, which is pretty small, less than 3.5 gallons, smaller than the MT09 tank, which I think is 3.7, and people often complain about that. When it's full of gasoline, this motorcycle weighed 515 pounds on the Daily Rider scales, and I think Indian claims on their website 514 full of fuel, so respect to them for being pretty honest about it. And the seat height, as you can see, I got a pretty sharp bend in my knee here. The seat is very low, 30.7 inches, 30.7, and that is down from 33.1 on the previous FTR 1200, I believe. And of course, the wheels got smaller, so that'll bring the whole bike lower, right? And interestingly, the suspension stroke was reduced pretty significantly from 5.9 inches to 4.7. So that also contributes to a much lower seat height. Yeah, so for me, 6'2", it is very easy to flat foot. I can stand with a few inches underneath my grundle between the seat and the top of my leg because yeah, the seat's quite low. One thing that is arguably not as noticeable right off the bat, but is worth mentioning, is the handlebars are narrower by about 1.5 inches, I think. Makes it a little bit less flat tracky, a little bit more European naked, you might say. Quite a comfortable place to sit here on the FTR. Free run at the off-ramp. This is nice. Bending through some curves. Yeah. Feels good. It comes with sportier tires on it now too. These Metzler Sport Tech tires instead of the Dunlop sort of faux flat track rubber, which is good. Oh no, traffic. So one good run at an off-ramp, get to lean on the tires a little bit, and immediately I'm paying for it. Traffic karma. All right, made it out to the fast lane of the freeway. Not going very fast yet, but I can talk about the seat a little bit. It's surprisingly wide and flat and comfortable. While we're stuck going kind of slow here, take note of the RPM, which we're sitting just above 3,000 RPM, and we're going a little less than 60 miles an hour. And this is in top gear, in 6th gear. And I think when we talk about fuel mileage, I'm going to bring this up again. But I would have loved to see some taller gearing in 5th and 6th gears. I know I always complain about gearing. I'm sorry, but I just can't help it. This engine is hugely torque rich. It's like so burly. I mean, if we're in 6th gear at 3,000 RPM, and if I roll the throttle on like this, it accelerates like crazy. It's awesome. It's got tons of roll-on power. So why not have it sort of lope along at 3,000 RPM when you're going actual freeway speed, 70 or 80 or whatever. Okay, now that we're out on the open road, we can talk about that cruise control. So if I tap this left joystick over here, it turns on the cruise control. I tap down, it'll set it, and then, as they say, you can forget it and just trundle along. Very good feature. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. You can adjust it as you go. It's it's nice. I like it. Anyway, we got to move on and talk about fuel mileage. The 3.4 gallon tank is kind of small, as I mentioned. My fuel mileage figures from riding this bike, I think the low number I got was 36 and the high number I got was 42. The range isn't terrible, but basically what happens is the fuel light comes on at 100 miles. Basically, I mean, it's telling me my range is 79 miles right now and I've gone 44 miles. So yeah, you're not, it doesn't have super long legs, unfortunately. As we go over the bridge here, there are a few bumps along the way, and that reminds me that the suspension is kind of stiff. I mean, they took more than 1 inch of suspension travel out of the fork and the shock from the last model to this one, and I think you're going to pay the price for that kind of move at some point. And I don't think that it's uncompliant or bad. It's just it's a fairly heavy bike and doesn't have a lot of travel, so it's going to be a little bit less forgiving than some other machines in the class, I think. All right, I think maybe that might be it. We talked about fuel, range, talked about cruise control, range, mileage. What else do we? Frickin' mirrors! Holy crap, you guys! We almost forgot to talk about mirrors. I can't believe it. And that would have been a shame because these mirrors are great. They're, you know, the shape is a little more stylish than functional, but they're in a nice spot and they're amazingly smooth. Considering that you definitely get a pulse of vibration through the seat, the foot pegs, the handlebar on the FTR. It's a big burly mill spinning around down there, but the mirrors are dead smooth. Gotta say, very impressed with the mirror stability on the FTR. So, all right, into the neighborhood. And we'll go for some footless stops here. First stop sign. Yeah, I did it. Not super confidence inspiring, but I did it. So the big elephant in the room with the FTR historically, especially, you know, the debut model anyway, was that the fueling was really bad, especially when the engine was cold. And Indian has said that they've done a lot to fix that. Nice, so 2 for 2 on the footless stops. Heyo. Yeah, they said they fixed the fueling, basically. And I will say it's better when it's cold, for sure. And in general, I find it to be not particularly herky-jerky. There's a little bit of driveline lash, but it's really not bad at all. I think they did a good job. They were wise to focus on that, because it was something that people complained about on the last model. And yeah, it's good of them to focus on it, because I definitely think they made it better. As we approach another stop sign here, we're 2 for 3 for the footless stops. 2 for 4. I'm losing my touch here late in the ride. One thing I did want to say is the clutch is probably my least favorite part of the of the drivetrain, I guess. And I don't know if it's the, yeah, it's not bad. I've stalled the bike a bunch of times, and my colleague rode this bike as well, and I asked him about the clutch, and he was like, no, I don't know, it seemed okay. The only thing he had to say about it was that the engagement zone was very fine, very small, and I think that's what it is. It's not unpredictable, it's just unforgiving, if that makes sense. You get used to it, but especially when it's cold, it's a little grabby and a little trickier to manage than I was expecting, and it's a lot of torque on tap. So yeah, it can feel a little bit lurchy. Again, my colleague didn't have as much trouble with it as I did, so could be on me, but there's a note for you. Right, past the Corvette guy's house. Got the Corvettes out. We'll give him a little American V-twin rev. I feel like Corvette guy would appreciate that. Maybe, I don't know. On the topic of revving the engine up for Corvette guy, for example, I will say this engine is very quiet, very polite around town, and I appreciate that I'm trundling through this neighborhood, and I don't imagine any of the people that I'm passing are thinking, oh, that stupid, annoying motorcycle is so loud, which is good, because I don't want people to think that, frankly. But I do wish it was a little bit louder, maybe just a little bit louder. I don't know. I'm so torn, because I don't want to annoy people, but an engine like this, I just wish it had a little bit more bark, just a little bit, just the right amount, you know, just make it perfect. Shouldn't be so hard, right? All right, Lover's Lane, time to talk about passenger accommodations. I was not able to coax my lady friend onto this machine, but my good friend Spencer did bring his girlfriend, affectionately known as K-Dog, here on Daily Rider. No one ever calls her that. I don't know why I did it the first time, but I'm sticking with it because that's her Daily Rider nickname now. She said basically it's not good. There's no legroom. The foot pegs are very high, the seat's kind of thin, there's no real support around you. So yeah, probably not a huge surprise that this bike is not wildly comfortable for passengers, but good to get an actual report from a passenger. For what it's worth, I think she's about 5'5", so it's not like she's particularly tall, and she still found it kind of cramped. So there you go, your passenger report. Got a little woolly there, just a little one. I appreciate when the wheelie control kind of kicks in on this bike, when the electronics are on right now, that it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't like completely cut power and like slap your groin against the back of the gas tank, which is just such an annoying feature on some bikes. It just sort of, you know, sets it down, cuts power just a little bit. I've had pretty good luck in general with the electronics on this bike, so I think that's yeah, something I appreciate. Right, into our twisty road section here, which as usual is clogged up with silver SUVs, as many roads are in suburbia. But I can tell you that the FTR handles pretty well. It's nice. The 17-inch wheels and sporting rubber have sort of predictably advanced its precision and capability in twisty roads, as you might expect. And more to the point, I think this is where you decide on a road like this if this is you know, a European wannabe or an actual competitor. And my verdict, after having ridden it on some roads without silver SUVs, is that it's a competitor. It's legit. It's fun to swing through a set of curves. It's not out of its element. It's not just a cruiser that looks like something else. It's nice. I think it works pretty well. It's planted and predictable and linear, and the engine's got good stomp. Yeah, and the brakes are pretty sharp. There's not a lot left wanting, I don't think, in the FTR's chassis. Come to think of it, you know, I just said the brakes are sharp. I was thinking about all that heavy-duty componentry. That's generous. The brakes are not sharp. The bite is pretty soft, actually. There's tons of power on tap. There's no problem with how much power the brakes have, in my opinion. But they don't have that real sharp bite that you often get from, you know, radial pull lever and steel braided lines and big Brembo calipers and 320 mil rotors, as this bike has. Sometimes the calibration of brakes like that are just, they bite really hard. It's probably a brake pad material thing, if I had to guess. So yeah, one thing I might do with this bike is swap out some pads for something slightly more aggressive, because 515 pounds, you know, needs a bit of bite to slow down. All right, we're peeling off the twisty road. Thank you, Silver SUVs, for showing me the race line through the twisty roads, and here we go, back out onto city streets. Long stretch of fairly unobstructed road here where someone might do a wheelie at some point. Not me, obviously, because I'm a very considerate and safety conscious citizen, but if you did want to do something like that, you can. I wanted to point out, if you go back to this home screen of the dash, which we'll dive into a little bit more later, you can turn off traction control as you ride on the fly, as long as the throttle's closed, which I had to do there for a second. Oh yeah, I think that's a notably flamboyant feature of this bike. I would expect them to be very cautious and conservative with being able to shut off electronics like that, but there you have it. TC off on the fly. Yeah, lots of power. But you got to give it a good old firm squeeze to get it to slow down quickly. I don't actually know how much time we have at this stoplight, but let's dive into the dash real quick. You'll notice that I got back to the home screen with this button here. This back button takes you to this home screen. I feel like this button should maybe have a home on it, because that's what it feels like it does, but then it goes back to this screen. So I guess technically it goes back. If you want to access that screen another way, you can click this button. And if you want to access that screen a third way, you can click this button. I don't know why there are 3 different ways to get to that screen, but more to the point, when you go back to this screen, this is where you access your phone, you know, connect to your phone, access your music, settings, brightness, ride modes, and such, all accessible through that screen. And it is a touch screen, as you may have noticed. That's how I shut off traction control. Yeah, in general, pretty good user interface, I think. They did a good job with making things intuitive, and I think the touchscreen is actually kind of nice. I don't think you need touchscreen sensitive gloves or anything. I reset the trip meter the first time by just holding down, it says trip 1, and I held it down and it reset. I didn't have any idea how it worked, but that did the trick, and I feel like, yeah, it was very easy to understand for me. As we pull up to another stoplight, I think I'm going to be at this one for a minute. So again, this is how you change the ride modes. You can go to rain, or you can slide it over to sport, or you can leave it in standard, because the bike only needs one ride mode, which is standard. And yeah, you can adjust brightness. I can make it brighter, I can make it dimmer, or I can click auto and it'll be auto brightness, which I think is pretty smart. Yeah, it's not a bad little system here. I think they did a pretty good job with it. Oh, green light already, holy smokes. Okay, off we go. So this is the part of the ride where I sometimes wax poetic about the engine, or you know, I say the engine is the only reason to buy this motorcycle because it's amazing, or oh, this engine is just a passionless heap of metal and it just betrays this lovely chassis. Or maybe I say something like that, I don't know. Hopefully I don't sound quite that silly most of the time, but anyway, the point being that this engine is great and unique, but not quite as raw and visceral as I think I want it to be. It's almost too good. It's almost too smooth and too refined, and that's a tricky balance. And it's not something that I envy Indian for having to try to figure out and please everybody. But in general, it's quite a good engine. But yeah, I just kind of like, whether it's the bark from the pipe or the way it kind of shakes and rumbles at low RPM, I don't know. Yeah, it leaves just a little bit wanting for me, even though practically it's really just excellent. A lot of stomp on tap. It's pretty fun. Reminds me most of a Triumph Speed Twin, maybe the sort of like sporty Bonneville spin-off that's sort of like a little bit more aggressive riding position, and it's got the high torque motor in it. Yeah, or a BMW R9T, something like that, you know. Not an actual performance naked bike, but just a sort of a retro naked that has some performance on tap when you ask for it, that kind of thing. It's a good combination in general. Oh, this is a bumpy section where the suspension is a little bit stiff. One other thing I want to talk about while we're riding is there's a question on social media about a quick shifter. Like, how come that bike doesn't have a quick shifter yet? And it's a fair question at face value, because it's got cruise control, it's a $15,000 bike, it's got electronics and traction control and a touchscreen and a color dash and all this stuff. Why doesn't it have a quick shifter? The way the transmission interacts with the engine is not in a way that I think suits a quick shifter. Like when I accelerate and go from second to third, if I try to shift too fast, like clutchless, or if I just try and bang through the gear too quickly, it's not happy. It doesn't really react very well to that. And yeah, it works better with a nice long clutch pull, or a nice deliberate clutch pull, and then a release, and give the flywheel some time to slow down a little bit and engage the next gear. So yeah, I don't think that it's actually appropriate for a quick shifter for what it's worth. Ah, son of a... my bad. But anyway, yeah, you know, I don't think that's a damning comment. I hope it's not, because using the clutch to shift it feels appropriate for this bike. It feels like a carved out of metal machine, you know. It feels like a true machine, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it has the type of performance that lends itself to a quick shifter, in my opinion. Anyway, here we go, approaching the FTR's spiritual home surface, you might say. There's a little dirt path here. And we got traction control off because we already did that. Now we can get Swayze. All right. Oh, jeez, yeah. You know, feels pretty fun to get it sideways, but but yeah, it's not real super happy on this. You know, you probably want a slightly different version of this bike. For that, I'm gonna hit the jump, but I kind of regret it already. Oh! Yeah, bottom of the fork. Probably could have seen that coming. You know, let's see if it'll hoik a wheelie, huh? Oh yeah. Sorry, good sir. Pretty good wheelie. Although it's not a great wheelie machine, something about the throttle response, I don't love it when it's up near the balance point, but certainly has enough power to send the front wheel skyward, that's for sure. This is the FTR S, which is sort of the middle of the street line. There's a base FTR, which I believe is 13 grand. Don't hold me to that. And then this guy, 15 grand for the FTR S. You get the colors dash and a few other things. And then there's the FTR Carbon, which has Öhlins suspension and some carbon, as you might expect. And yeah, and then there's the FTR Rally, which I don't remember how much that was. 13 also, or 14 maybe? Anyway, you can look that up, I'm sure. Point being, the FTR Rally does have the 18-inch rear wheel and 19-inch front. That's more familiar from the last FTR 1200. Lots of people are probably going to spring for the one with the Öhlins suspension, and that's cool. I haven't ridden it. Maybe the Öhlins makes the, you know, just takes the suspension compliance up a notch, as it often does. Those Swedes know their springs, but I yeah, this one felt like the most appropriate one to evaluate. Yeah, I think it's probably the one I would get. Again, I haven't ridden the other ones, so maybe that's too bold to say, but it seems like the best blend of features and capability. Right, almost to the office. And we haven't tried to back it in yet. Let's just give it a try right here. Down to first gear, dump the clutch, you get a big shudder, bunch of ABS going on. I don't want to back into the driveway because there are picketers here. They're picketing about something, about not paying area standards, according to the sign. So maybe they've got a point. I don't know. We'll trundle into the driveway here and we'll do our U-turn test, keeping in mind 2 parking spaces is approximately the U-turn standard. So here we go. I'm gonna go full lock. Full lock. Yeah, 2 parking spaces, just about. Okay, so average turning radius, I'd say. Oh, and there's one more thing as we go nose to nose with this Challenger. Someone challenging the Daily Rider parking spot, if you don't mind me saying. But let's see if we can get this thing to do its little trick. There we go. See this little icon that just came up there? It's got the V-twin, it's got an X on one of the cylinders, and if you listen to the engine, it sounds probably something like a 600cc single. That's because the rear cylinder has deactivated, which it does when the coolant is above 173 Fahrenheit, I think, and the ambient air temp is above 60, something like that. Throttle closed, 0 miles an hour, that kind of thing. So it's a heat-saving measure, perhaps fuel as well, but mostly heat, I think. And yeah, there you go. You can hear the FTR single. It does kind of sounds like a KLR 650 or something. And then when you rev it up, you get both cylinders back. And that's what it sounds like. There we have it, FTR S. I hope you enjoyed that ride. I had a good time. I feel like we learned quite a bit about this bike. I hope you did too. So now we'll jump into Instagram questions, as is tradition. First question is from Ezra Michael _lift. Please talk about the fuel range or lack thereof. I love this bike, but the range sounds awful. Talked about it in the ride, Ezra Michael. Hopefully you're paying attention. Next question is from Jason Max. Jason Max? Anyway, from across the pond in the UK, the second license tier allows you to ride bikes with a maximum of 47 bhp. Indian offers a restriction kit for the FTR. How badly do you think the limited power would impact its overall rideability? This is a great question. I'm probably not the right person to answer it because I don't know exactly how the tiered license thing works, but what I will say is that I don't think that I would get this bike with 47 horsepower. It will work fine. I'm sure it'll be great. But I don't see the point necessarily of riding around on a 515-pound lump of motorcycle if you're only making 47 horsepower. And I understand that, I believe, as far as I understand it, at some point you would graduate to the next license tier and then the power would be unleashed and then you would have the whole bike as it stands. And if that's the case and that's what you want to do, I think that would work fine. I don't think that it would be a bad bike with 50 horsepower. I just think I might get something a little lighter and smaller that packs a punch, a 210 660, something like that, that bike with 47 horsepower, it weighs 115 pounds less than this does. And then when you do get your next license, you'll have 100 horsepower and a great agile sport bike. Maybe you like the way this looks better. In that case, go for it, I guess. Thanks for the question, though. That was a good one. Next up, we got a bit of a rapid fire set of questions here, which I think is an interesting set. So FTR 1200 or Triumph Speed Twin, how does it compare to an XSR 900 or Z900 RS? This or CB 1000R, the Speed Triple Monster R9T, this or Triumph 1200 Scrambler? Joel 1337, excuse me, asked the real question here, which is, I'm not really sure what bikes to compare it to. What do you consider to be its main competitors? And it's interesting, right? Because someone asked about a CB 1000R and someone asked about a Triumph Scrambler. And I don't think anyone would ever say, like, how does a CB 1000R compare to a Triumph Scrambler? Maybe you would, but those bikes are probably a lot less likely to be cross-shopped. And yet it's been connected with this bike because people aren't quite sure what kind of bike it is. And I think that's fair. I mentioned this on the ride a little bit. I think what it reminds me most of is a Triumph Speed Twin or a BMW R9T. It does not have the outright performance of a Speed Triple or a more high performance, European Naked. It's more of a, neo-retro, kind of classic looking, but modern Naked with a whiff of performance. Next question is from Mr. Bike Bits. As a taller rider, how do you find the reduced seat height and shorter travel suspension? We covered this a little bit. It's extremely easy to sit on. It's very approachable for someone who's tall, and I don't think the legroom is totally unreasonable for what it's worth. The shorter travel suspension I'm a little disappointed in. I wish it had a little bit more travel because I think it would make it slightly more comfortable without sacrificing a ton of seat height. I think a 31-inch seat height or something like that would be totally reasonable, but that's just me. Mr. LeBlond asks, lovely bike, how is the switch gear to work? The little joysticks look like it could be trouble with gloves. Right, okay. So, son of a freaking swing arm mounted fender got me. This is the question here. These little joysticks here. One thing, they are kind of tiny. They are very tidy and small. I appreciate that the switch gear isn't this huge grapefruit on the handlebar. It's a reasonable size. What I think they did pretty well is they separated them. There's some space between each one. So when you go to use the cruise, you're not going to fumble with the dash joystick. And likewise with this and the blinker. There's pretty good real estate used to make sure that you don't trip over yourself. And I never found it to be a problem at all. I didn't use it with thermal gloves or anything, but in general, I think they did a bang up job, and I don't think you'd have any problem with the switchgear. SBleed6 asks, is it noticeably hot on the legs after a while? I rode a demo in 2019 and remember a noticeable amount of heat from the motor. If you're coming from a bike that really belches off a lot of heat, it's going to seem totally fine. If you're coming from a Versus X300 or something, like a small bike that's very good about heat management and doesn't make a lot of horsepower, then yeah, it's going to seem hot. Certainly these pipes sticking off the side here, they're going to throw off some heat, and it's going to happen. And obviously Indian had some idea that it was an issue worth addressing because they have that cylinder deactivation technology integrated into the bike. So yeah, it's going to be warm on a warm day, but I don't think it's unreasonable compared to other bikes in the class. All right, last question here. Last person I'm going to pick on is JNalt1, who asks, is that really a bike that needs cruise? Here's the thing. With cruise control, heated grips, I don't know, a center stand maybe even, I don't know, whatever. Maybe I'm pushing it with that. These are options that don't get in the way if you don't want to use them. And I understand the question. It's not a bad question as a matter of course, because it doesn't seem like the kind of bike that's for touring. It doesn't have very good range. It's a sort of like brawny, urban, naked, Street Fighter sort of a thing. But cruise is great. It's basically always great, and it probably always will be great. And if you're considering not buying a bike because it has cruise, because you think it speaks some sort of volume about other capabilities or aspirations that the model has, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. If you don't want it, don't use it. Okay. Thanks, as usual, for all the questions, everybody. I'm going to step inside now, and we're going to put this Mamma Jamma on the Daily Rider leaderboard. Stick with me. Hey, everybody. Here we are inside the Daily Rider headquarters. We got some cool bikes in the shop. I just want to point that out. It's a CBR Triple R and an R6, a pretty spicy sport bike metal. And then the Battletoad and the CBR 300 of CTXP fame. If you haven't seen our $1,000 Bikes to the Track episode, check that out. It's on the RevZilla channel. Dave the Jixter, of course, prince of the shop here. Anyway, what we're concerned with most of all, as usual, is right here. Daily Rider leaderboard. We've got an Indian FTR S ready to go, sort of. I don't have an Indian logo. I bring great shame upon the Daily Rider dojo. Sorry about that. I'll try to fix it as soon as I can. Friendly reminder of what's at the top of the board on the podium and beyond. Bunch of darned ADV bikes up there. One of these days we'll get a bike that'll put them in its place. I don't think the FTR is that bike though. Sorry, no. Is it better than a Honda CBR 500? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a little bit more comfortable. It's heavier and that kind of thing. Aprilia RS660? It's, the FTR is by sort of a similar amount of technology, and the Aprilia is lighter and it's easier to use in some ways, but it's less comfortable. Triumph Street Triple R? Better? Worse? I don't think so. Street Triple is so good. It's so good. So yeah,
Here's where the FTR is going to go. Not a huge surprise, right between the Street Fighter V4S and the Aprilia RS660. I'm giving the Street Fighter the nod. I was so impressed at how compliant and easy to use that bike was, considering what a beast it is. And it fights the streets, as we know. So we can keep that in mind as usual. And yeah, just more comfortable than RS660. If I had to choose between these two, I'd definitely get on the Indian day-to-day just because I like the upright riding position. Okay, there we go. We got the bike on the leaderboard. We learned a lot about ourselves maybe on that ride, certainly about the bike. I hope you learned something. We did a wheelie or three. I hope you had fun, and as always, I very much hope to see you next time on Daily Rider. See ya.
Rocks the Huggies. Be a sad parent somewhere. Holy Moses! 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Think we're going to a rock concert or something.